Welcome to Laguna Podcast, an attempt at illustrating the lives and stories from the Texas outdoors. Today I sit down with one of the few men who have been at the forefront of the industry as it has grown in Texas. Being known as the man behind the Redfish crack, this is my conversation with Andy Packmore. Okay, all right, well, I'm ready when you are.
Fire away, man.
Cool, all right, well, here we are at the Gordy & Sons shop, and I'm sitting here with Mr. Andy Packmore. I think this is going to be kind of cool because, again, the first few times I heard your name, I kind of only ever heard it in tandem with the Redfish crack, and I didn't really understand how much history you had in this industry. And I mean, for good reason. It's not like it's kind of hard to find you on social media.
Very true. I'm one of the old dinosaurs that doesn't have any accounts on any of that.
So with that being said, I just want to kind of start from the very, very beginning. Your first memory in the outdoors, and kind of like run me chronologically through your progression as an outdoorsman.
Yeah, I was lucky. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and beautiful country up there. If you're into the outdoors, it's incredible. Hunting, fishing, all that. My dad was a big outdoorsman and a big fly fisherman. So at an early age, I saw fishing and was around it a bunch. Got to spend time up in the Ozarks all over the place up there, and then travel with my dad, my mom, and just was exposed to it at an early age and just fell in love with it all the outdoors. So it seemed like anytime I'd come home from school or anything else, I was out shooting BB guns, building forts, doing all the things you do as a kid, and never spent any time indoors. And that was just kind of how I early on got into the outdoor scene and everything else. And then probably really seriously into fishing more in high school and college age, and did a lot more bass fishing at the time with conventional tackle. Did some fly fishing as well with my dad, but more back then I thought of it as trout. I was one of those that did a little bit of trout fishing, but did a little bit of bass fishing with it starting out, and then got into it more and more. But did a lot of conventional bass fishing in college, to the point that I lived in West Palm Beach for a couple of years in school and didn't do any saltwater fly fishing hardly, which I look back now and think, you knucklehead, you were an hour and a half away from some of the best fishing in the world. And we went and did it. I did it with conventional tackle a little bit more, and bass fished a ton, and had a lot of fun with that. And I still remember, like a lot of people probably, especially knuckleheads in this industry like myself, I didn't apply myself in school as much as I should have. So my dad one time was a good motivator, I guess, because I kept teasing him I needed to bring the bass boat down to Florida. And he, of course, never let me do it. And then finally one year he said, all right, tell you what, I'll make you a deal. If you straight A's next semester, you can take the boat back to school with you. And you talk about a way to motivate a kid. That was, I went in, and he laughed at the end of the semester. I came to him and I handed him the report, and he said, my gosh, said, look what you can do if you put your mind to it. Yeah. He's like, I should have given you this boat to use it earlier on. So I drug it back down to South Florida, and literally we set up classes where we had Fridays off almost every week, and occasionally Mondays. So we would take 3-4 days and go out to Lake Okeechobee, Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge, and then a little bit down the Glades and everything, and just get lost for the weekend. And it was just absolutely incredible time. And my dad was smart and dangerous as well by doing that. But yeah, he was my first influence for sure. One of the, everybody will say it, but one of the best men I've ever met in my life. I was blessed and got into that. And then kind of long story short, after that, around college age, I started fly fishing a lot more serious, and met a gentleman in Arkansas named Dwayne Hayda, who is...
I've had that guy come up in between conversations with me and other people before. Yeah.
Yeah, he is an absolute legend up in Arkansas, and went on to do a lot of other things. Great artist as well.
He does a lot of smallmouth, right?
He does a lot of smallmouth.
Matt Sherwood. Matt Sherwood is the guy who always brings him up. Sorry.
Absolutely. Matt, he knows Matt. I know Matt as well, and they fish together quite a bit. And Dwayne's just done a lot of great stuff for the industry. Like I said, incredible artist. He was really good friends with Dave Whitlock, who helped kind of start all the programs up in Arkansas to get a lot of the trout stocked back in the day with the fly fishing organizations up there. So anyway, I was lucky. This was probably high school age into college, and I met Dwayne, and my parents had gotten me a guide trip for Christmas to go fish with him. And I went out and fished with him, and I remember he was laughing because I showed up my...
This episode is made possible by our friends over at Gordy & Sons Outfitters, located in Houston, Texas, and employing a team of experienced outdoorsmen specializing in fly fishing, hunting, and wing shooting. Gordy & Sons is sure to prepare you for success in the outdoors. Next time you find yourself prepping for a weekend getaway or a bucket list trip, be sure to give them a shout.
I had one of my dad's fancier rods and whatnot. We were going canoeing on the Buffalo, which if you hadn't been to the Buffalo River up in Arkansas, it's something you owe it to yourself to see sometime. Really? It's one of the prettiest rivers this side of the Rockies.
Try to describe it.
A little bit like the Guadalupe area, kind of the hill country, but even more dramatic, I think. Some 400 or 500 foot bluffs right off the rivers. Completely protected. It's a national park, so there's no development. And for lack of a better way to put it, you feel like you're stepping into deliverance when you get out of there, because it is wild country, beautiful water, good whitewater rafting, and excellent smallmouth fishing. Not big fish, but you can get up there and catch as many bluegill and smallmouth bass as you want, and just completely get off the beaten path. We used to hike into there and camp for days at a time when we were in high school, and up there we'd occasionally get a lot of snow even on the winter months, which was a lot of fun. But so it was great. And then I was lucky enough to get to know Dwayne really well. And I say lucky, I was probably that annoying kid that I would show up at the shop every weekend and go, "Hey, where are you going fishing? Is anybody fishing with you? You mind if I tag along?" And he was kind enough to take me under his wing and really mentor me in the sport.
So Dwayne is the reason why you took fly fishing a little bit more seriously to the next level.
100%.
Wow.
Yeah, I just started literally following him around, and he's one of those guys like any of the big name guys that you've met down here and interviewed on your podcast. I was lucky enough that he liked me or just felt sorry for me or something and took me under his wing. And he, to this day, is one of the best anglers I've ever been around. He's one of those guys you can drop into any body of water in the world, and he's going to be, within an hour, be one of the best fishermen in that area. He just can figure anything out, and is an incredible caster and just a great human, just a good people, like so many people in this industry. And I think that's probably why after that many years I'm still sitting here doing this. Is the industry is such a fun industry to be in, and you meet so many great people, as I'm sure you've done.
I've been lucky to, yes.
Yeah, you can see it on the book. And congratulations, by the way. We're sitting here in the store here today, and we've got a big selection of your books that just hit the door, and they are absolutely amazing.
I'm glad you said that. I was going to wait till the end of the episode, but we'll just nip it in the bud right now.
No, man. I mean, you were kind enough to bring us one in a few weeks ago, and we've had it sitting here on the desk, and so many customers have come through, and it's just like a trip down memory road for them.
Really?
Yeah, they start looking at this and like, oh my gosh, I know that guy, and you did an absolutely amazing job on it.
Thank you.
The book is great, and I think it really pays homage to the coast and the coastal fishing down here. So yeah, well done.
That was a goal, but thank you. And sorry, that's awesome. I really appreciate the kind words. Yeah, no, I guess I'll tell a little bit about it. So, when I had seen the original Yeti tarpon books, and I thought that was an amazing idea, and I saw how they kind of went more towards like ducks and stuff like that, and the tarpon one again just stuck to me because I was big into fishing, and I was like, man, like I feel like there's enough stuff here in Texas and enough talent to kind of show Texas off in a similar fashion. And my goal was to kind of make it to where people saw the similar kind of quality. And that was I wanted people to kind of put it next to their books. They're next to the 4 Yeti books. And people would be like, oh, when did that one come out? And it's funny enough because I actually had someone text me today who's actually going to be on the podcast in a couple of weeks. And he was like, you were so nonchalant when you told me about it. And when I saw it, because he went to the HBHQ, he was like, I thought Yeti had dropped a book that I wasn't even privy to. And I was like, well, that was kind of the goal.
It does. It literally looks like one of the Yeti books. So if that was your goal, it's well done, because it certainly looks like one.
Thank you. All right. Well, so back to from you and Dwayne making you take fly fishing seriously. run me through what you were going to finish there and then just keep going?
Yeah, no, he really got me into it. I started helping him from time to time on small guide trips, and that's kind of what got me into guiding back in the day.
Okay.
And just fun learning that area. My family had a house on the Little Red River up there, which is one of the 3 or 4 big trout rivers in Arkansas that you can fish, and has some amazing brown trout fishing. Some of the biggest trout. Actually, I got to hold the world record brown trout in my hands that a friend of mine caught up there named Rip Collins.
Really?
That was just something else to see, a 40-pound brown trout. And it looked like a king salmon. Just amazing to be a part of that and be around that. But again, just a great community of people up there. Took a young guy like me, kind of included me in a lot of the stuff that I had no business being a part of. And just through being around Dwayne and being around Rip and some of the other people, just a good way to get into the industry and kind of get to know it. And that led to Dwayne and I just started fishing all over the place, from the Western Rockies, San Juan. And then one day out of the blue, he came up while I was still in college and said, "Hey, we're going to this neat destination. Have you ever heard about Christmas Island?" And I'd never even saltwater fished. And at the time, this was probably 1990, to tell you how long ago.
This was a completely undeveloped fishery at the time, too.
It was.
Jesus.
I mean, I say undeveloped. They had been fishing it for a while, but
Yeah.
I didn't know much about it. You know, I'm a little kid from Arkansas, just like, oh, man, that sounds interesting. And
About the
back
step
then,
on the moon. That's crazy.
yeah. And what was amazing back then, I think the trip was $1,800 or something like that. It's amazing what, how things have changed. But so I said, sure, I'll go, and no idea what I was doing. And next thing you know, we ran off and did that, had a great time, and learned all about the saltwater. And that's the first time I really went, wow, this is special. I would like to do a lot more of this. And we started doing more, and started guiding with him quite a bit. And that led me to got an offer right when I got out of college to go guide in Alaska. And luckily my father was like, you know what, you're young, do it. You'll never have another chance to do that. And I laugh and told him later when we talk, as you get older, I was like, I don't know if you regret telling me to do that or not, because I never turned around and went back into the real world after guiding up there. But it was amazing. I was lucky because I got out of school and I probably had a month and a half before I had to be at the job in Alaska. And, you're young, you're bulletproof, you don't think about things. I said, you know what, I'm going to load up my old Land Rover, put my canoe on the roof, and I'm going to drive. And I took off, and probably to this day, my favorite thing I've ever done. I drove by myself all the way to Alaska and took a month on the way up, fished everything I'd ever read about.
What was your, I guess, like your pinnacle of that trip? The one that, like, everyone, I assume, if you gave me a list of all the things you did, there's probably one that you were like, this is the one that I want to do the most. Which one was that?
It was funny because I went with really no distinct plan.
Really?
Yeah. And keep in mind, this is before GPS.
Of course.
Road maps, the old AAA fold up road maps and everything. And I just took off, headed north, and said, I'm going to go start off in Montana and then slow down, and started there. And it was, again, I get back to community with the sport. It's amazing. I met a guy that I went on a fishing trip with on the Bighorn River, and he called a buddy of his over in Livingston and said, hey, this guy's coming that direction. When he gets there, take care of him. And it's just amazing. I didn't know these guys from Adam before I started fishing with them. And next thing you know, I'm staying at the house and going fishing with them, and just hanging out. And luckily I didn't have to rush, because I took, over a month to go up to Alaska. Spent a bunch of time in Montana, met a bunch of people that I'm still friends with to this day. And drove on up from there all the way to Anchorage. Had a incredible, worked for a lodge called New Halen Lodge, which a lot of the people here in Texas, it's one of the biggest draws. So I still have clients that I outfit every day in here that are going to New Halen.
Really?
And it's pretty amazing. They it's down near Lake Iliamna. It's one of the best big rainbow fisheries in the world. I was blessed because I was still pretty green and pretty young in guiding, but Alaska is certainly the place you want to guide. It's a lot easier to catch fish there than it is on the Texas coast, as far as, skill level, I would say. But was a wonderful trip. And then kind of, you say, highlight of the trip on the way home, I really didn't have to rush because I had nothing I was going back to as a job or anything else.
How long had you guided in Alaska?
I just worked a full season up there.
Okay.
So it was through a summer. And then on the way home, and it's one of those things. I had met a girl that who I'm no complaints at all. We're together today, so it's a great thing. And I love you, Deb. But we're coming back, and I had about a 2-month period to get back home, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to slow down and take everything in. And I drove all over British Columbia, saw this stuff. I knew I would never get a chance to do that again, probably with that much time. And pinnacle of it, I got very lucky and got to fish one of the famed rivers up in British Columbia called the Kispiox. And very true story here, and you'll laugh about it. Dwayne, that I mentioned earlier, was good friends with Debbie, my fiance, and said, hey, let's tie some flies and send them up to him in Alaska when I was working up there. Well, we were fishing down in British Columbia after all this, and I was fishing and had just the most unbelievable lucky trip. Everything, the stars aligned, the fish were eating. I was probably fishing pretty well at that time too, because I'd been on the water for
the whole season,
4 months straight every day. And so we got lucky, hit it, and on the last day of the trip, literally the last run, the guides had left to get the boats. I'm fishing, and I've run out of flies, literally run out of flies, because it was that good. I mean, I won't say numbers because it's a silly number of steelhead, but on this one hole, I came up and like 3 flies in a row, I hung up, broke off on the bottom of the river, just, kind of hanging on its swinging sinking lines. And so I'm like, golly, I've just burned through all my flies. I'm horrible. This is terrible. What is going on? And I'm looking through my box, and it's all stuff that's just not steelhead stuff that I had left. And then I look at this one fly, and it was one, I'm not kidding you at all, that Debbie had tied and sent to me in Alaska. And I just stuck it in my box, like, I'm not going to fish that. And I'm like, and it was
out of pity.
Yeah, I know. And I was like, no, she tied it well, because Dwayne's a world-class fly tyer, unlike myself. He is really, really good. So anyway, I tie this fly on, and it's kind of a sculpin type pattern. I swing it through this hole, and right in the same area I'd been snagging, I get tight again. Okay. And I'm like, oh, golly, I'm going to lose this fly. And I kind of pump the rod twice trying to pull it, and it pulls back. And I'm like, oh, Lord. It takes off, and it ends up, it's a huge steelhead. And one of the, probably, if you had to ask me today, one of my, if not my favorite fish I've ever caught, it was that fish, just because of
the context behind it.
The context behind it, and it was about a 43-inch steelhead, big buck, just one of those that you see in the pictures, and I got lucky to be in that hero shot. So it was pretty special. And then anyway, drove back, to kind of shorten the story up here, drove back from British Columbia and kind of retraced my route back through Montana, ran into all the guys that I'd met on the way up, stayed with them, fished some other times in there, went through the park in later parts of the year, which was beautiful, seeing Yellowstone and all that. And then worked my way back I remember it was really strange. When you're guiding in Alaska, you have nothing to spend money on. We're in the middle of nowhere in a lodge.
That is true. That is totally true.
So I had a pocket full of money. You're young. You're not thinking about saving anything and doing anything. And I came back through Wolf Creek, Montana, up near the Missouri. And I just was driving, and I looked down. I'm like, man, that's a beautiful wood drift boat down there. And I pulled into this fly shop, just as you do, to go in to talk to these guys. And we started talking. I was going to fish a little bit, so I stayed a couple of days. And I went in one day, and I just commented, man, that's a beautiful boat out there. Whose boat is that? And the owner of the place said, well, that's mine. And he said, but I'm thinking about selling it. You interested in buying it? And first boat that I actually bought ever, other than a canoe or whatnot, was that boat. And I handed him over some cash. We made a deal. I hooked it up to the truck with I'd never even rode a drift boat before, and brought it all the way back to Arkansas and started fishing out of it there and other places. It was, just a treat. But that whole experience and that drive, one of my favorite things to this day I've ever done, just to have that much time to spend. And then really, not really to even have a plan. I'd drive along and be like, oh, the world's biggest ball of twine. Let's go check that out. Or let's look at, I drove through Mount Rushmore. I hadn't even thought about it on the way up. And I'm like, oh, wow.
Might as well.
I'm right. I'm in the Black Hills. I got to go see that. And it was incredible. And then fished some great rivers, met some amazing people, and came back, and then just kind of decided right then and there, I'm like, you know what? I think I want to keep guiding. And that's when I started guiding up in Arkansas, North Arkansas, more seriously with Dwayne. and worked for a shop up there called the Woodsman way back in the day, and had a lot of fun. Got me into the sport that I just love, and kind of kept me in it. Started working retail, and then I guess it was probably mid 90s. Was thinking about opening a fly shop up there.
Mm-hmm.
And a gentleman who I think came up with you the other day, a gentleman named Kerry Marcus, he was back in my day as a youngster. You would see this guy and you're like, that's the guy I want
That's
to be.
him.
That's the dude. I mean, he was a sales rep in fly fishing that had every major line of, I mean, at one point I think he had Sage, Umpqua, Tibor, Sims, you name it, every major line he had it. And he had a car full of the best rods and the coolest gear. And he would just pull up to fishing areas and open the back door of his truck and go, hey guys, just pick a rod, anything, go fish it. And everybody in the world, Kerry was just like the coolest dude there was. And you got to meet him. I know we talked about that the other day. He's here in town, and really, really neat guy. And he heard me talking about the shop. And he said, if you're really serious about that, you ought to talk to these guys that are wanting to open a new shop down in Houston, Texas. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And they had opened a shop up in Dallas called West Bank Anglers. There's still one up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming to this day. And they had kind of almost franchised them to a degree. And they were going to open their third store. The one in Dallas was just crushing it. And I went and met with the people, and lo and behold, 2 months later, I'm like, well, I guess we're going to move to Houston. And I bought into the business and moved down to Houston without ever spending any time here other than playing in a few soccer tournaments and way back in the day. And I knew no one in the city. And uprooted myself and Debbie. We moved down here. She helped run the store with me, and we had that shop. We moved here in 1997.
Wow.
And opened the shop and had it till around 2003, I believe. And just an amazing time. Met so many people and customers down here that I still work with today after all that time. And it was interesting. Kerry got me into that. And like I said, didn't know a soul when I moved here, and got here, and he introduced me to one of the guys you've already interviewed, Chuck Nizer. And Chuck took me on my very first red fishing trip.
Really?
Way back. And keep in mind, this is even, I think there were one or two guides at the time even running polling skiffs. Everything were
97. In like what area? Or just in coast
you mean with
general?
Nizer?
Yeah, like like you said, two guys running the area.
Yeah, Freddie Lynch was running a boat.
Yep.
I remember back then. Eric Glass was running one of the little. I think he was running a
I know Rick was running.
one of those.
I know. I think you're right. He was running a Pathfinder. Rick was running a scooter at the time.
Yeah, most guys were. Chuck had a J-Craft when I fished with him.
Really?
And then I think
I have a picture of it actually. What am I saying?
Yeah. Just amazing. And, coming from Arkansas, and I'd saltwater fished by then other places, but I'd never fished the Texas coast. So I literally knew no one. And again, I guess that's the blessing. You come into a shop and people start coming in just to meet you. And again, the community, Chuck was kind enough to take me out, show me around, and do all that through some other people that introduced me. Kerry was a good friend of his. And I just remember being so intimidated when I got onto the coast, because in a river, it's bank to bank. You know where the fish are going to be. Down here, I remember going out the first day and I'm like, how do you even have a clue where you're going? I'm like, this is massive. And why are you stopping on this shoreline versus that one? Which way are we going? Which way is home? I mean, in river, it's pretty easy. You just follow the river, you're going to get where you want to go.
Yeah.
And I was so intimidated by that when I first moved here. I didn't know how to break down a bay or tides or any of that. And trying to learn that as a greenhorn, so to speak, was really interesting. But again, going back to the community, it's just amazing how people with open arms get perfect example. Literally the day we opened our store, we're the new guy on the block, the new competitor. And, people are looking around thinking, who are these guys coming in here? Well, this guy walks in out of nowhere. I'd never met him, didn't know him, starts talking, super nice, and obviously knew a ton about the industry. and ends up he's the guy named Dave Hayward, who you know Dave.
I need to sit down with him
been
also. Yes, I need to sit down with him also.
Yeah, if anybody has been around the Texas coast for any time, they know Dave Hayward.
Mm-hmm.
He is an icon and just a legend down here, been around forever. And he literally walked into my store the first day, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, he's the competition. We carried Orvis as well, and we were 2 blocks down the street from them.
Really?
Yeah. And so we're like, my gosh, this is strange. And it wasn't that at all. He literally came in and said, hey, I know you're new to the area, man. When you get your feet set, when you get settled in and get your legs under you, call me and I'll take you down to the coast and introduce you to who you need to know, and I'll take you fishing, show you around. And for a direct competitor to do that, can you imagine?
Yeah.
I mean, almost any other industry, you're going to get people,
being more cutthroat.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll never forget that. And Dave's still a dear friend, and I think one of the neatest guys in the industry, and has done so much for the coast. He was, big working with Flatsworthy and totally. Chuck on the all the oyster preservation and everything, which just an amazing job, and kudos to them for all the work they did on that, because it's really that's something that had to happen. But so I will never forget that, kind of meeting that nice crew of people when I got here. And then very ironically, I remember we were looking for a place to stay, and I'm in a house looking to rent this house, and I look out of the back window and I'm like, wait a minute, that's Dave Hayward. And I literally, what are the odds, in the city of Houston, I moved into the house across the street, completely unplanned or anything else. And of course we got to be buddies. Dave's house was always the watering hole for everybody after, after work. You'd see 8 or 10 cars there, people tying flies, people, having a beer, margarita, whatever the taste was that night. And it's just, like I said, I keep going back, amazing community.
I like that. I like that you're saying that, because I had this conversation yesterday, or a couple of days ago, with Brian Donovan. Like, one of the things that I have learned a lot through this podcast is actually how interwoven the industry is, or at least like the community or the characters themselves. But it's something that I never could see from the outside looking in, because it all goes on behind closed doors. It's not really in your face. It's one of the coolest surprises that I've ever learned, actually doing something like this. One of the things I actually was curious to ask, and I don't mean to throw you off track or anything, was that first day that you went out with Chuck. Can you kind of describe what it was like, the fishing and stuff like that?
God bless you. I love you, Chuck, but we didn't do real well that day. It was one of those. It was one of those bad weather days. But he was like, come on down anyway. Kind enough to not charge me, just taking me out to show me around, and he just showed me all this amazing water and the bay, and just kind of whetted my appetite for it, so to speak, and just. Really fun. And I'd never been on a scooter boat, that type of boat. And I'm like, my gosh, he's like, hold on. You look down and, the water parts behind you, and there's dry land. And it's like, my gosh, these boats will go anywhere. And then we got out, and, Chuck, you've seen his calves. His calves are the size of my waist. And he'd get out of the water, and he would walk you on these marches all back through that marsh for days. Nowadays, I think everybody pushes through the same stuff. And back in the day, those guys used to wade for miles. And it was neat. And, I remember seeing, on future trips with him and things, and I listened to your podcast with him, and he talked about some of the changes in the bay and everything else. And I remember back a few times with him, seeing some of those massive schools of fish that nowadays, like he said the other on your podcast, you don't see as much of that, where literally, I remember he did a program at my shop, and he had a slide show that he was doing back in the day before PowerPoint and all that good stuff, the little trays and slides sliding around. Well, anyway, he had a slide and a photo of a school of redfish that he and Kerry Marcus again were on, that had to be, the size of a football field. I'm not kidding. And you could see it in the photograph, this dark cloud as far as you could see in this photo, and it was all redfish in the bay. And I'm not talking about, 100, 200 fish. I'm talking about 1,000 fish, or probably more than that. And to see that was amazing. I was just like, God, this place is just so full of life. And even to this day, I still, when I fish other places, whether it's some of these, lucky enough to go on some of these cool exotic trips that we outfit to or to help people with or host, And even you go to some of these places and they feel almost devoid of life compared to the Texas coast. There is so much, the forage fish, the bait fish, the shrimp. It's just rafts of mullet. A lot of places I fish, you just don't see as much of that. And it's interesting. And I still feel, I'm not nearly as experienced as Chuck and Eric and those kind of guys that have been around forever. But since I've been here and since '97, I feel like the fishery's still really, really strong. And I think I heard y'all talking about that on a couple of your podcasts. Yes, the fish may have gotten a little bit tougher. They may be a little spookier than they used to be.
Honest.
Yeah, a little less honest. And but I still feel like this coast offers you a chance. When the weather's right, you can go out and you can find fish and get shots.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty special because I've fished, a lot of other places where, man, sometimes you go out and you're like just struggling to even see a fish. And I still feel like this coast is just an amazing fishery. And, through some of the regulations and stuff, whether you agree with everything or not, I think a lot of good things have been done.
I think a lot more good than bad has been done for sure.
100%. You'll hear people come in griping about, they reduce this limit or this or that sometimes. But it's all, I think when people are being honest with themselves, it's been great for the coast because I think our red fishery is still just world class. Yeah. And it's one of my favorite things to fish for, if not my very favorite fish of anything that I catch.
I don't disagree at all. I mean, you this last year after through 2 years with the new regulations, I mean, the trout fishing was pretty impressive. You were seeing more and more fish. You got guys like Ben who've been consistently hitting bigger fish, and we didn't have a big freeze this winter. So I kind of think this is going to be a really good summer for big trout fishing. But one of the things that I wanted to tell you a story of, because I maybe haven't had a chance to listen to the episode with Dudley Haas, but Dudley is a guy that I got connected to because of Chuck Nizer, actually. So Chuck had actually called me. He was like, you have to do this episode. There's one thing I'm telling you to do. You have to do it. I was like, okay, done. So I went over and I did it. So his dad was a big proponent, or one of the big influences on why 9 Mile Hole has a pass. And so one of the things that what he was telling me was when they would first go into 9 Mile, they wouldn't go in through the boat side. I think they would go in through the other side. So they would walk 3 miles and get to about the water level, and then they keep walking, and then they would see the fish. But one of the coolest things was when the sun would get really hot and start to evaporate all the water, you would start to see the giant schools of fish start circling and circling and circling. The first week or two, they would still eat. You still double down, triple down on fish and go home. By the fourth or third week, they wouldn't see the fish. They wouldn't see the lure anymore. Or at the time, they thought they just weren't eating, that they were done, whatever. Well, what they decided to do is they foul hooked one. They brought it to them, and then they saw that it had gone blind. So what was going on was that because of the increasing salinity in that area, since there was no way for these fish to get out or no new water coming in, those fish were going completely blind this whole time. One of the other cool things that I had actually heard on that story, and I implore that you go listen to it because it's a really cool one. But some of the big black drum would get kind of landlocked, essentially. They couldn't really hide underwater. So these seagulls would stop on their backs and start picking them while they were alive.
Wow.
Yeah.
God, again, the stuff you see on this coastline just blows my mind. Every time you go out, you see something different, something new. I've never seen that, but that's
I don't think I've seen it either.
That's pretty amazing. But I always tell people, when customers come in here and shop, we're talking about the coast, and they ask about, what's it like? And I said, well, it's interesting because to me, it's very different, as you go from section to section to section of the coast.
Completely agree.
There's a lot of different things in different parts of it, certain, back lakes and certain things and ways you see fish. Like, for instance, down in Lower Laguna, when I fished down there, and it's actually been, sadly, a couple of years since I've been all the way south of the hole, and been on Lower Laguna. But to see what we used to call them bird dogs, you'd find the little groups of seagulls 2 feet off the water just hovering, and you look under every one of them and there's a pot of redfish tailing. And for years, I never really saw that much on the middle coast. I would see it, and then up here in Galveston, you would see it religiously back in the back marsh. Up here, you can see those you just start looking around, scan the marsh, you look for little schools of seagulls and go to them, and there's birds under them. In a lot of years on the middle coast in Port O'Connor, I saw that occasionally, but not much, where it was almost a given you were going to see it down in South Texas. And
Yeah.
I have no idea why. But it was fascinating. And then just to see the different types of fisheries, the water clarity, of course, as you go south, just gets cleaner and cleaner. Right? And I still remember, the first time I went with Eric, going down there and going up on the sand, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. For those of you that hadn't done it,
it's like a bathtub.
It is a bathtub, and it's, I don't know how long that flat is between South Padre and Mansfield.
It's probably like 11 miles. Technically, if you run the East Coast, it's like about 11 miles, I think, somewhere, maybe. Yeah.
And if you get up on the sand, it is just white sand as far as you can see. And I remember a few trips down there, being on a 10-foot Mouty, going out and running all the way to Mansfield, and then getting back on that sand as far as you could get, which that boat will go anywhere, and getting out and waiting, and you look back and you can barely see the boat in the horizon. And it's just, what an experience to get out there and do that. And still one of my favorite places on earth.
Here's a cool story you might like. I did an episode with Wade Duncan. So Wade was also around at the time with like skates and all them.
Sure.
And so what Wade would do, man, I'm blanking on his friend's name, and it's really killing me because it might have been Kilgore. I'm not too sure though. But what they would do is he actually made a 4 foot by 4 foot like fiberglass, just like a big square. And at the time, this is before you had too many tunnel boats running on the east side, these big trout, like, 26 to 30, whatever you will, would go and they would just lay on the sand like alligators sunbathing.
Oh, wow.
And so the only way to really get to them, because you spook them, they'd have to balance themselves on something he called like the mosquito, I believe, or something like that. And he would sit on that and he would just float with the wind until he got close enough, and then would cast at him, because it was the only way to really get to him.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember seeing that. Well, Hartman, one of your buddies. I remember one year we were down there with, there's a local guy down there named Cruz Lamas, who's one of the best fishermen I've ever been around. He was a pharmacist for years and knew everybody on the coast. Great guy. But we were down there fishing with him one day, and Rick came over. They were all buddies, and we were cooking dinner one night. And Rick was just talking about these huge trout, this and this and this, and I'm jawing at him like, "All right, yeah, that's guide speak, man. Come on, don't BS me." And he kept saying, "Man, we got 6 shots at fish over 30 inches today," and I was like, "Come on, yeah, whatever." And of course, I'm just ribbing him and poking him, and finally he just gets enough of it. And he goes, "All right, man, I'm off at noon tomorrow. Are y'all going to be out?" And I was like, "Yeah, we're fishing." He said, "Well, meet me up at I don't even remember where it was, up by the Royal somewhere." And he said, "Hey, meet me and I'll hop on the boat with you, or hop on my boat and I'll show them to you." I was like, "All right, buddy, come on, big man, let's go do it."
Come on, big man.
And which he is. I mean, he could thump me, but and I'd seen him cast, so I know I can cast a little bit, and he is an exceptional world-class caster. So we got on his boat, we run out, and we get up onto the sand, and I'm like, okay. And I mean, not 10 minutes into it, he goes, "Oh, here they come." And I look up in the distance, and I'm like, there's no way that's trout. And I've still to this day never caught a huge trout. I've caught them up to about 27 or so. But
I think any fish over 25 is a trophy fish.
Yeah, it's great. And if you did it down there, that's where I caught it. But but we saw some just immediately that were 30-inch fish. I mean, honest ones. And but I laugh. And Rick, I love you, man. I remember you go and you looked out, and they were at about 120 feet. And he goes, "All right, start casting." and I like I said, I can cast a little bit, but I look back and I'm like, "Dude, really?" And he just starts chuckling, and I'm like, "All right, whatever." So, but he was right. He said these fish, you got to hit them from so long to get, you're up in your chances if you can get the fly out there. And, not to say you can't catch one at 20 feet, because most of the fish down here on the coast are, 20 to 30, maybe 40 foot shots. But these fish on that white sand, as you know. On
the white sand, it's just different. You have to be good on the white sand for those big fish.
You do. And I was not, so I will tell you that honestly. Now I got some shots into them, but ended up what it was comical. You think about how difficult they are, and I swear we were casting, and I had my other buddy was on the other boat that I got off of. They were within about 100 yards of us, and we were all jawing back and forth, and they were laughing, watching. They're like, "Man, what are you doing? You're casting, you aren't hooking anything." And about that time, we see one come in, and I took my first shot as far as I could bomb one, and pretty close to the fish, and then a second shot, and a third shot, and a fourth shot, and the fish is coming and coming and coming and coming, and he doesn't turn. He comes right to the boat at like 20 feet above the boat, and I'm still just drilling him. I mean, I'm just putting it right in his head. Yeah, eat this fly. And it runs underneath the boat, takes off out of the backside, and as he's running, I just kind of throw a Hail Mary. Oh, let me just chuck this thing by him as he's going away at 100 miles an hour. I throw a cast, I don't know, 60, 70 feet to his left. One twitch, the fish literally stops, turns on 90 degrees, and eats the fly. I swear to you. And of course, what happens, I'm not expecting that to happen.
So you're off guard.
I'm off guard, and I completely I trout set. I mean, I literally raised the rod up like I was dry fly fishing. And I had a hook head shake for about half a second and gone. And I dropped to my knees and just about fell off the boat. I was like, oh my God, there was my trophy 30-inch fish, and I just blew it. But that was so weird. After he'd seen the fly and us for 2 minutes and probably 8 shots, and then he turned around and ate the fly as he was running. So it's so strange. I see that on redfish a lot.
Yeah,
but I can't say I'd ever seen that. And I'm like, that is the weirdest thing.
If you read the story that I wrote for the book, it's a identical story. It was me and Rick. We were trying to set the 20-pound IGFA class record because at the time there wasn't a record, and we needed a fish over 10 pounds. And the year before, I landed one that was 9.5. But that was with another buddy waiting, but obviously on a fly rod. And this I'm not going to spoil the story because it's a really good story. And I wrote it. It took me a while to write it. But it's a really good one. I think you should read it after. One of the coolest stories I ever heard from Rick in regards to what we kind of just talked about was Rick was out with Steve Rajeff. This is one of the times when they used to be really, really close in the shows and whatnot.
Yeah, that's a couple of good
casters on the boat,
for
right?
sure.
And Rick had spots a trout about 90 foot and 2 false casts. Steve hits fish 90 foot, eats immediately, and it was like, it makes sense. I mean, these fish at longer distances. Rick's whole thing was the further away you get to the fish, I think it's the greater distance the fish will travel to eat the fly. I guess in redfish, that's kind of what Rick always taught me is you throw flies at 60, 70, 80, or 80 is a little much, but 50 to 60, you're going to get better eats or more responsive eats than if you were throwing at 20. Granted, it's all anecdotal.
Yeah, it is. And I think especially down there, where you get out on that white sand, you get up here in Galveston or Louisiana, for God's sakes. I mean, I've literally thrown it out of my hand and pitched it with my hand and caught a fish or two before. So it's really strange, but yeah, that was amazing. And I still remember it's funny because we were talking about stuff. Finally, I went, all right, big boy, get up on the bow. I said, I'm going to push you for a little bit. And he steps up on the bow, and I'll never forget. He pulls off his line. He keeps stripping. And I'm like, all right. And then he strips into the backing onto the deck of the boat. And I laughed, and I go, Rick, buddy, I said, dude, I know you can catch. You don't have to show off. I was teasing him. And he goes, no, man, the further I can hit him. And I'm like, all right. And then we look up, here comes a fish, and he uncorks a cast with a spoon fly, no less.
That's disgusting. That's tough.
Sorry, Rick, but it was the truth. It was a silver spoon fly, a little tough. But you know how those things helicopter, they don't cast good. And he threw a cast literally, I don't know, 105 feet with a spoon fly on into the backing, and had a fish come toward. He didn't hook it, but I was just like, okay, that's another level of casting that's out there that always you aspire to. No matter how good you get, there's a few guys out there like he and Ray Jeff and whatnot that are amazing. Luckily, you don't need to cast like that to catch fish. Thank God. Like we always tell people in here, it's not distance. It's being quick and being accurate,
being fishy.
Yeah, and being fishy. Feeding a fish is a lot more important than being able to throw 100 feet.
Totally. I feel like we kind of went on a little bit of a tangent, which was awesome. You were still telling me part of the story where you were still with West Bank Anglers. Yeah,
that was that's where I started here. We got hit kind of hard with 9/11 when all that went down, and it slowed down. We ran a full travel service out of there as well.
That's why. Okay.
And people just stopped traveling, obviously, for a while after that, and that slowed us down, amongst other things. So we shut it down 2002 or 3, somewhere right in there, and took a little time, a few months, just fished and recharged the batteries, because that I'd put my heart and soul into that.
I can imagine.
It's one of those things that's hard to see go away, and But I have a lot of people over the years ask me, man, do you regret that? Yeah, it's seeing that thing go away. And yeah, I regret losing the money and losing my business, but I don't regret any of the time there because it's why I'm here. I met, again, so many great people that I still deal with. Literally last night, the last customer I worked on here at this store at Gordy and Sons last night was one of my customers from the day we opened at Westbank.
Really?
Yeah. And I still deal with him, send him on trips all over the world. And he comes to me to get outfitted, just because he trusts me, I guess. Doesn't know me well, one of those things. But no, it's neat. And so I don't have any regrets to it. Would I have loved to seen it go on and turn into a, multi-million-dollar business? Sure. But, it's retail world stuff, and fly shops are a tough business. Yeah. Standalone in particular.
Totally.
So it's a interesting line of work, but I love it, and that's why I stayed in it and ended up moving on from there to a company here in town called Fish and Tackle Unlimited, and ended up helping them really get their fly business going, as well as some travel, and did that for a long time. Was over there, 13 years or so, and again, just met more and more and more people, and got to be friends with a lot of people that I still fish with, religiously today. And then I guess I've been over here now for, 4.5 years. It's hard to believe. And just couldn't be luckier to have been, to have met this group of guys, and the crew we have here at the store. Just great people. The family behind it you just couldn't have more support than what we have here. So I'm blessed. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I got no regrets with Westbank and the history with that. And then, learned a lot with Fish and Tackle Unlimited and that group, and was exposed to some more conventional tackle stuff as well. And got to travel quite a bit when I was with them too, which was, how do you beat that? But then ended up here and absolutely just love it. Again, just an amazing community of people, and good times all around.
One of the things I wanted to ask, now that I wanted to get the story out of the way, run me through how you kind of became the Redfish crack guy.
Well, my little 30 seconds of fame there, I guess. Back in the day, we were fishing a bunch of real spooky fish one summer down in Port O'Connor, and we were trying different flies. And you catch them on everything, clousers and whatever else. I'm weird. I don't ever tie a spoon on, and unless it's like my life depends on catching a fish, I might tie one on, but so I just won't tie those on very often at all. And Dave is even Hayward. We laugh at. He's got a what do you call them? Like a little when you're cooking and you smash stuff up with the little
like a potato masher.
Yeah, the little mashers or the stone things that you grind up spices. Anyway, yeah, he's got one sitting on his desk at his fly shop in Rockport for spoon flies, and they put them in there and just crush them because he's like, that's not a fly. One of those. I'm not quite that extreme, but I'm almost there. But anyway, so we had some real skittish fish, so I was like, I'm gonna try this, try that. And finally, and I tie a little bit. I am, trust me, by no means a good fly tire. Marcos Enriquez that works in here, world class. Lester, world class. Hayward, great fly tire. A lot of those. I tie very basic, very simple things to catch fish. So I just looked around and said, you know what? I want something that lands a little bit quieter, that's shrimp-like imitation. It's going to push a little bit of water. So I just started tying these flies, and I basically, to me, anything you copy of Tim Borski's is going to be good. And my first ones I tied were actually before all the brushes came out. And
Are you making your own brushes?
No,
okay.
No, I that's too much work for me.
Someone says they're not a good fly tire, but then it's making their own brushes.
No, I didn't make my own. But when I first started, I was tying with feathers, and basically it was a cheap copy of the Borsky fur shrimp, but I moved the eyes back into the body of the fly instead of up at the front, trying to make it land a little quieter, because I'm one of these guys. I actually most of the time fish lead eyes. I don't fish a lot of bead chain, and the way I fish, I like to put a fly right onto a fish and make him make a choice. I don't lead fish. It's funny when I fish with Hayward, he and I fish pretty differently and both catch fish. He fishes really big flies, leads fish by a good ways, let them come, bumps the fly.
Stuff,
and he crushes it. He's an amazing angler. I'm the other. I want to put it right on their head, or if I'm really on my game, just on the peripheral and twitch it once and try to get that reaction strike. I feel like I get more eats on that first reaction than I do if a fish has to follow a fly. And I've seen that for everything. I say that bonefish, a lot of times they'll run, but permit in particular, same thing for me anyway. In my
Rick told me that too. He was like, just fish him like a jack. You don't have to be all too fancy. Just hit him on the head is what he told me.
Yeah. And I was told, and it wasn't me. I didn't figure that out on the permit. I was told that by a guide, a couple of guys I was with one time. They're like, man, put it on their head. And I'm like, man, they're going to spook. Oh, you're going to spook some. Yeah. But you're also going to get some to eat by doing that wouldn't eat otherwise. And I started doing it, and lo and behold, redfish in particular, I feel like if you can get it to them without spooking them and make them get that first reaction strike, you get an impulse strike before they get a chance to follow it and look at it or smell it or not smell it for that matter and say, well, something's wrong. I think the longer a fish, to me anyway, and I don't really know what I'm talking about, but this is my theory, is that the longer a fish follows a fly, there's just more and more things are coming into his, lateral line, his senses and everything. They're saying this isn't real.
And he's getting closer to the boat too. You see through the waves at that point.
Absolutely. So I like trying to put it right on him, and that's what precipitated this fly, or made me, create this fly. And it basically started out with feathers, and then we started, when it really got hot, started tying it with the brushes. And when Enrico came out with his stuff, we had him in the store, and I started tying it, and he's like, oh, that's great. Yeah, it looks good. And like I said, it's a copy of Borski's type stuff. Anything Borski makes, you can tie on and you'll catch fish. He is a master. And then Scott Summerlot down here on the coast, one of the guys that really took me under his wing and showed me around a lot down here over the years. He had a fly I think it was called a simple shrimp, if I remember right, that was similar type fly as well. But anyway, I tied that, moved the eyes back, put it in there, and we just started crushing fish with it. And we were like, man, it's like crack. They can't refuse it. They can't turn it down. And that's how the name came out. Me and a buddy of mine, Smarge, who is one of my main fishing buddies I fish with all the time, we just started tying them in all sorts of colors and weights and styles, and they worked great. And we were just catching a lot of fish. And then what I guess made it take off, Scott Knoll, who you probably know, he's been a guide and, a retired police officer from up here in Houston, great guy and really good photographer. He came in and was guiding at the time and was griping about how the fish were getting really picky. And I said, man, take some of these and try them, see what you think. Maybe they'll work. And he started tying them and started catching fish on them. And finally, one day he came in and said, man, do you care if I write an article on this? He wrote for Everett Johnson's magazine.
I met Everett yesterday at the show. Finally, we're gonna sit down for a podcast too, which is awesome.
He is another one that's been around forever and knows everybody. Great guy. He and Pam, they're as good as you'll meet. Super people. And so Scott wrote an article about tying flies and different things in that magazine. So he said, can I write an article about crack fly? And I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? And he had changed it up a little bit. He added a little bit of a egg sac kind of on the back of it that wasn't originally on it. But I now use that as well. Like I said, I'm not a great fly tire. The guys have improved it since I tied the original one. But,
the only thing that I think should have been improved was the name. I think you missed a great opportunity to call it like Pax Crack.
Yeah, yeah, that could have been a good one. My name does tend to have a lot of nicknames for sure. No doubt with that name. No, you're right.
That's actually what I'm going to name this episode, by the way.
I like it. But like I said, the reason that fly I think is so successful, honestly, is because it's the simplest fly to tie.
Yes.
Anybody can sit down and tie it. It's like tying a woolly booger or a seducer almost. It's basically a synthetic seducer with eyes or not, but I tie it sometimes even unweighted. But most of the time, like I said, I like a fly to hit and dive straight down fast to the fish's,
like line of sight,
yeah, where he's feeding. I've seen so many times guys throw bead chain flies and they go over the fish and the fish doesn't react. And so I like to get it down, even in grass, because I'm casting close. I'm not leading them that much. But Yeah, I mean, that's the little I know. That's what I know, and I don't know much, but I have caught fish on that fly. I will say that.
No, I just was you were talking that I was like, man, like Packmore, crack. Like, I feel like there's something there.
Yeah, that one I did not. Yeah, that was we laughed, and I've caught. It's one of those things. Once you tie a fly, you kind of like. I'm like, I want to see what all I can catch on this, and I've caught everything you can think of. I'll just tie one on to try it, and I started tying a permit crack and all this, and I've caught quite a few permit on one.
Really?
You know, just trim it up, shape it a little more like shrimp, trim the back of it, and so it falls, hook up and tie 'em heavy so you can get down to a permit. But I've done pretty well on permit with that fly too. But mainly it's a redfish killer, and we tie them for Louisiana in bigger sizes. Time for stuff, and there are a bunch of I guess I laughed at you because a bunch of companies now make their versions of it, and the one that's out now, Sightcast, the great guys down there, they're good people, and they even acknowledge it in there somewhere. I remember one time seeing my name, and I'm like, oh wow, somebody actually said that, which was kind of cool because I don't deserve it because I am not a good fly tyer, but it was kind of neat to see that, but. So yeah, that's kind of the story of the crack fly.
Good. I'm glad we got through that one. Speaking of names, the name you asked me to mention when we started, Chris Phillips.
Yeah, Chris Phillips was one of the early kind of saltwater guys down here, and really one of the early guys that had a Florida style boat. He ran a big, I think it was a release, and it definitely was not what by modern day terms would be a poling skiff. I mean, it could handle, he'd go 20 miles offshore in this thing. Did a lot. And he was one of the guys that really, probably one of the very first that I remember anyway. There's probably other guys out there that started going out and doing the offshore thing with fly rod. He started doing that a lot and catching all sorts of stuff. And then Chris had been around for, forever. He fished with a bunch of the guys. I don't know if you've seen the old tarpon video, the classic one from back in the 70s with all the guys in the Keys Uvaldine, this ton. I'm
Can you find it on YouTube, or is it?
You can find it on YouTube. They've made digital copies of it. I think it's just called Tarpon, if I remember right. But it's one of the ones that this kind of the original guys that were the hardcore saltwater guys that kind of pioneered the sport down in the Keys. And it's an awesome, awesome video. Well, Chris is old school enough. He was fishing with those guys and knew a bunch of them from Florida and fished at. When we'd have guys come in when I was at the shop, he worked for me at West Bank and amongst other places here in town before that. But, Flip Powlett would walk in and run over and give him a hug. Like, hey, buddy, man, it's great to see you. And I'm like, holy cow, who is this guy? And he had been around way before I moved here. And then he came to work for me, and we got to be really good friends, and just a neat guy. We always, his motto was saltwater's for fishing, freshwater's for drinking. That was his thing. Very, very coarse. He fished nothing but 10 feet of straight hard mason.
Mason mono?
Yeah, he'd fish 16-pound hard mason. That's all you need.
Jesus.
And he would just tie straight, no tapered leaders. And basically he'd throw rattle rousers, this old rattling fly that was been around forever. He would tie those and fish those. And neatest guy in the world, had literally a museum of tarpon, redfish, bass, whatever paraphernalia in his house from the 60s, 70s. Wow. Photographs of all the greats, Huff and Flip and all these guys that he knew and had met and been around, and just amazing guy. And one of the guys that certainly has been around or was around as long as anybody up here. Just a great guy in general, but tragically he developed a brain tumor when he was working for us. And this is one of these you hear about, people talking about, man, it's hard being a guide, which it is, because he was a full-time guide and worked part-time in the shop. But when you're doing that, most of these guys don't have insurance, don't have, savings really. They're living check to check a lot of times. And Chris used to brag, I can live on $15,000 a year and eat ramen, catch fish, and 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 he was one of the happiest guys in the world. Literally knew everybody's name when they'd walk in the store. know their kids, ask how they're doing, and it was genuine. He'd come up and hug everybody, and he meant it. He's just one of those guys that just loved everybody, loved his life, and just was living life to the fullest. And he all of a sudden, I remember, this happened. He kind of collapsed, found out they had this tumor, and he still didn't, came in and was working, and he was scared, obviously, like anybody would be, but it was still Chris, and not woe is me, I can't believe this is happening, and everything else. Well, one of the neatest things, it gets back to community, talking about this, how many great people are in the community and fly fishing world, and even fishing world in general. But a few of us just said, hey, what can we do? We got to do something to help Chris. So we started talking about, hey, let's try to put something together, man. If we can raise $10,000-$15,000, that'll be life-changing for him, just to keep food on his table, because he was going to have surgery, not be able to work, obviously
totally
not be able to guide, and he had no insurance, no savings, really,
and all
or
these bills come in. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So we're like, man, we got to do something to help him. And so just a few of us knuckleheads that had no business putting one of these types of things together started talking about it, and then organically through this community. And again, mind you, this is before
social media,
before anything like that to get this out. We started talking about it, and luckily Dave Hayward, that I mentioned again, going back to him, tied in with Orvis. His house, the watering hole, became kind of the planting grounds for this whole thing. And we started talking with a group, probably 6 or 7 of us as friends. And it started off small. Luckily, we had, besides all the fly shop knuckleheads, we had a couple of guys that were professionals and nice guys that were customers. One of them, and I'll say his name because he helped so much, was Corey Horelick. He's a local guy here in town. It's just one of the kindest and best humans you'll ever meet in your life. He was an attorney, and he kind of said, he started talking about it. He said, all right, we'll set this thing up. And he figured, let's set this up in a trust and do all this so we can do it where bill collectors won't be able to come after the money. This will just be a way to take care of Chris.
Okay.
And so we start this thing, and I will never forget, like I said, 10, 15,000. That was kind of our goal. And all of a sudden, we start reaching out. Hey, Chuck. Hey, Eric. Hey, whoever, can you throw in a guide trip, for Chris? Oh, absolutely, man. I'll throw in a guide trip. I'll throw in, a piece of art. I'll throw in, whoever you talk to, any single person you'd ask knew Chris. He was, just one of those guys. Everybody loved him, and it just started growing. And we're like, wow, this is pretty cool. We didn't know. And next thing you know, my phone rings and it's Flip Pallet. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Oh, man, I heard what's going on with Chris. And, man, through he and Scott Summerlot back at the time had a good connection with Hell's Bay. And, they said, you know what, we're going to reach out to Hell's Bay for you guys and see if we can get one at cost for you. And then you guys can raffle it off. And Flip said, I'll come in, I'll sign the boat, put my signature on it, and fish whoever buys the boat as well.
No way.
And this happened out of nowhere. And, and keep in mind, again, no social media. This is organically started to happen. And we're like, oh my gosh, it starts growing, and it starts growing. Then some friends fish with these guys up Sweetgrass Fly Rods up in Montana. They build beautiful custom cane rods. And they were like, you know what? We really want to. We've heard about this through a couple of your customers that fish with us. Well, Corey fished with them, and they heard about it, and they said, you know what? We want to build our first saltwater cane rod we've ever built and donate it for y'all.
Wow.
With 2 tips and all this. And then they got so excited about it, they said, not only when we do that, we're going to come down to the event and auction it off with y'all. And we're like, holy cow, and it just one thing and another and another and another, and it just started growing and getting bigger. And then we took, when the guys came in from Montana, we took them all down to the coast, a whole bunch of the crew. There were probably 25 or 30 of us. A lot of the guys we've mentioned on the talk today.
Yes.
Guides and friends and people. And we went down and had a big weekend down there, took Chris down for one of the last times we all got to fish together and do all this stuff. And just an amazing time. But the guys from Montana came down. from the Sweetgrass place, and it ended up being one of the worst weather. Huge northern blew through. One of these things. Like you look out when you see those storms, you say, "I'd never get caught in one of those.
Yeah.
I'm not dumb enough to be out there in that." And of course, we all got caught in it like that. It came in. I've never seen a storm come in that fast from the north.
Jesus.
And by the time we were all trying to run back to the dock, it hammered us. And I remember looking over and seeing one of the guys from Sweetgrass, older gentleman that was in the boat with me, and I was in a buddy of mine's boat I'd borrowed. I didn't have a skiff, and I'd borrowed a boat and was running him and another friend. We're just banging through the waves coming back, and all of a sudden, boom! Here goes the push pole flying off, and I'm like, "Oh no!" I said, "This is my friend's boat, guys. I can't leave that push pole. We got to turn." And it was nasty water. I'm like, "Man." So when we turned, I looked at my other buddy that's in the boat. I said, "Make sure and grab that thing first pass." I said, "We're not going to get 2 shots at this." So we turn the boat, take a little water on, but not bad. My buddy misses the push pole. I'm like, "Oh no!" So we come back around. I turn around the second time, and when I do, we literally take one over the bow, and it goes from nothing in the cockpit to knee deep in water. And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm going to sink my buddy's skiff and this and that." We finally get the thing on boat. I look over, and this poor guy from Montana was terrified. And we're right in between, if you know the area between Grass Island and Bayucas, kind of in there, but we were in shallow water. But you know how it is out there, you can't, when it's blowing, you can't tell it's shallow. And the guy's looking around like, "We're gonna drown, we're gonna die." It's fine. And I stopped. I was like, I put my hand on his shoulder. I said, "Don't worry, it's you're fine, man." And I shut the boat off and I stepped out. I'm like, "Look, worst case, we're gonna get wet." But so anyway, we got back in the boat, got back to the dock. I'll never forget that. But it was just cool. Those guys came in, and then not to drone on here, so I'll get to it. But the event, the day of the event, we're doing it over at a bar called Blanco's here in town. It's an old honky tonk, famous place, and we had made up signs. I mean, again, everybody stepped up. Like I said, Flip and Hell's Bay and all these guides and everything else. We're still not sure what it's going to be. Johnny Caraba from Caraba's here in town donated all the food. Did all this amazing fried chicken. So, just like so many people in the community, again, just reached out and helped. So we're driving over the morning of, and I'm still like, I hope 20 people show up. We have no idea who's going to show up. We've been talking about it.
Yo, do you want to get any RSVPs? You want to do any of that?
No.
We're just like, whatever.
We're just a bunch of guys that work in a fly shop. Man. I'm not that smart. So obviously, so we're just thinking, man, I pray somebody shows up to this thing. And we knew we were going to get a few people because obviously the boat and some other cool stuff. What ends up, we had, I think, between 400 and 450, 500 people showed up to this thing. It was amazing. We're sitting there. We had made up paddles to bid on stuff, and we ran out of those instantly.
Jesus.
And people start coming in out of the woodwork to bid on stuff, and we start just, prices are going up. People are bidding on things. The fly rod that we talked about, some amazing things happen. A friend that was there had somebody, his wife had gotten hit by an 18-wheeler in a tow truck, an 18-wheeler, and was in a terrible accident, had to get life flighted to Herman Memorial, or I think it's Herman where life flight is. And one of our good friends, good fly fisherman, happened to be the trauma surgeon that works there. And he called him and said, "Hey, my wife's been here." He literally was out on a date, dropped his date, said, "Sorry, honey, I got to go," bolted downtown and ended up, for lack of a better way to put it, Neil Ware, he saved his wife's life. And he came to the event, bought that fly rod, and gave it to Neil at the event.
Wow.
And it was just one of those, you just brings tears to my eyes thinking about it.
Yeah.
But that was awesome. And then Chris got up and talked. And then people went kind of nuts on that too. So Summerlight, who we all give hell all the time, he's fun to poke. He's just got a big red button on him you can punch and light him up and get him excited about anything, and we love him to death. He came to the deal, and he had this massively long shag at the time. So as he's going, and everybody knew him, he's boisterous and loud and in the best way. And he had done a ton to help for the event. Well, he's walking around on stage, and one of our customers down there yells out, "Hey, I'll give you $500 to shave Summerlight's head. And everybody looks at the stage. I mean, the whole place goes silent. They look at him, and Scott's standing there with the spotlight on him, and he's like, God bless you, Scott. I don't know if I would have done it. He looks up and goes, you know what? Screw it. Y'all can shave my head if y'all raise enough money. And people started throwing cash at the stage.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I think I can't remember the total, but I think it was almost $7,000.
Just and whoever,
just of guys throwing money at the stage, and whoever ended up giving the most got to be the one to shave his head. You were the one. So so ended up another customer, good friend of everybody's, ended up paying the most and got to go up there on stage and shave his head completely bald. Right. Do you have pictures of this day? I bet I can find some through our group. Yeah, I'm sure we've got some somewhere. Again, I think back then I had a flip phone, for God's sake. That kind of thing. But I'm sure there are some around for sure. But yeah, we were hoping to raise $10,000, $15,000, and we ended up doing kind of a smaller one after this. And between the two, we almost raised $200,000. Ended up the generosity of all the people to just come out. And that, again, like I say, the reason I'm still in this after, I don't know how many years I've been, good grief, since I was in Arkansas in retail. So in the early 90s. So it's been 30 plus years. That's why I'm still in it. You just meet so many amazing people and great people, from guides to customers. We're blessed. We really are. And Chris's event just showed that, and he ended up, God bless him, ended up passing. But that's literally probably the thing I'm the most proud of, anything I've been a part of ever.
I can imagine.
Was being a part of that deal, because he literally didn't have to worry about money ever after that. He had the money in savings. He could eat like he needed to eat. He could get taken care of like he needed to, and it was just an awesome thing to be a part of. Wow. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
No, I'm glad we did it. So we got 18 minutes till the shop opens. Typically, I want you to just kind of tell me, to end it on a better note before we do the last two questions. What are some of the better things that you've seen as the industry has progressed through the years that maybe makes you really happy about the industry in terms of like community or whatnot, or something like that?
Yeah, the community, like we just keep talking about, is the biggest thing. And it's fun because, I think for a period of time I was concerned, probably towards the end of when I had my original shop, I felt like it was an older generation sport.
That's how I felt coming into it too. Like, I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah. And we saw that and we're like, man, we got to get some young guys into this. There need to be more of them. And I'm sure there were in Florida, probably even more so. You hear about the Fordyces, being the little guy under working with Flip and getting to know him, and, Dustin Huff under his dad and the guys like that. But down here, the community just wasn't as big. We didn't have as many fly riders back in the day. And it just got bigger and bigger, but it still seemed like it was an older generation. That's something I loved. And it was funny. It was kind of eye-opening when I came here to Gordy and Sons. I'd been in the industry a long time, and I was like, came over here, and Baron Boyette, who great guy that works here with me, they had this tournament that they'd all put together here called the Galveston Classic that we do every year. And I was like, it was my first year to go help with it, and I'm like, oh man, this will be interesting. I'm sure I'll know all these guys from being in the industry forever. And so went down to this, the first year for the tournament, and I'm like, who in the hell are all these guys? There's just tons of 18 to 25, 30-year-old guys with skiffs. And I'm like, wow. I recognized some of them from the shop, but didn't really realize,
of course, that they were running the boats or whatever.
Yes, into it sometimes. And I'm like, wow. And that's what I would say. I really think there's so many young guys getting into it now, and girls. It's funny, our fly tying get-togethers here, a lot of times we'll get together and have a little social, and half the class or half the people that come in are women, which is really cool too. So, and then there's a big group of women here in Houston that, from all over actually the state, that actually travel together now. They go on all these exotic trips, and it's no dudes. They'll leave their husbands at home, and they'll just, 8 or 10 girls will take off and go to the tropics. So I think it's the industry's grown a ton. Obviously during COVID, ton of people got into it that had never tried it before, just because they had more time on their hands. They could work out of the house and rock board or something. And so I think that in a weird way helped the industry a lot as far as new people getting into it. Now the downside of that is there's a lot more people on the water these days, and there's a lot more skiffs. But I hear that, and I hear some of the, as a guide, I'm sure if I was guiding, it would frustrate me to come around the curve and see 3 boats on a shoreline you want to fish or something. But the truth is, I go down and fish a lot of these areas, and you can still find fish. That's what's amazing. And yeah, they may be a little spookier than they were back when we were talking about earlier, but it's the fishery is still amazing. I think for the most part, people are trying to do it right, and not. They're not going to come right in on top of it if they know what they're doing. And if they don't, sometimes it's an honest mistake. They don't realize they're doing something wrong. But I think it's in the industry. I like to see the young blood getting into it.
That's
which
good.
Which is nice.
I like that. I'm really glad you said that, because I feel like I also felt the same way. With that being said, since we're kind of running low on time here, 2 last questions I always ask everybody to end it. The first one you kind of talked a little bit about in terms of your time in West Bank, but looking back at your entire career, is there anything that you wish you would have done differently, or things maybe you wish you would have done at a different time, or something like that?
Like I said, I really don't have any regrets. All this stuff kind of, I'm one of these guys that everything happens for a reason.
Of course.
And, you go through some tough times, and that was a tough time. That was seeing your heart and soul getting torn out, just like, man, my business is gone. And, but, like I said, tons of friends that, hey man, come down and fish, come hang out, come do this. And then got into another business, learned a lot through that. And then, through that, got unbelievably blessed and lucky to be where I am now. And, I can't say enough about this place. It's been amazing to work here, and just absolutely love it. So yeah, no
Good.
real regrets that I can think of, other than, you always want to fish more than you do.
Yeah.
But I can't gripe. I get to do more amazing things usually than most. So I live a pretty blessed life.
Awesome. The last question I always ask is, as if you were talking to like the younger generation, literally what we just talked about, some of the folks that are maybe now just getting into the sport between 12 to 16 that might, run skiffs when they're 20. Is there anything, or maybe even people who just work in the retail side of the industry, is there any piece of advice that you would give them in terms of trying to like achieve, I don't know, longevity or prosperity in the industry?
Yeah. And it's after having hired a bunch of younger guys to work for me back when I was doing that, and then working with all the different shops with younger guys too. 100% the biggest thing is don't burn bridges. Do not, treat everybody as kindly as you can. And I mean, I know that sounds cliche, but you don't want to burn bridges. You want to keep things happening. Even if you're leaving a place or whatever, don't walk out and disrespect people and leave a bad taste when you leave to go to another job or another line of work or anything else. You just never know when it's going to come back.
I guess you can argue what you just said is always maintain community.
Well, again, there it is.
That's what I want. I feel like that's been a consistent reoccurring theme in this episode.
It is. And if you do, that community is always going to be there to help you. No matter if your fly shop's going out of business like mine or whatever else. If you, stay above board and are honest with people and just an honest person, and then, just don't burn any bridges, because you never know when that's going to come back, and somebody's talking to somebody, and if you've been a bad employee or whatever else, it might come up in a conversation where you don't even realize it, but they're talking to somebody that might be a potential guy to hire you down the road. Who knows? So I would say don't burn bridges, and as young, I would say realize that you don't know everything. When I got into this, I was bulletproof. I thought I knew, I know what I'm doing. I'm doing this. And, I look back and realize just what an idiot I was most of the time. And so I would say, be open to ideas and realize you don't know everything. Don't burn any bridges. And the last part is just, man, apply yourself and work hard. I mean, no matter how smart, silly like me, whatever you are, if you work hard, you'll end up okay. Don't take it for granted. Just come in, put your head down, do your work, and work hard, and things will come.
I like that. With that being said, I mean, I feel like we've gone over a lot. Is there anything you want to have said? Any like parting words?
No, man. Just like I said earlier, I don't know why anybody would want to listen to me on a podcast.
I don't
here,
know
but,
anyone listens to this podcast either. Don't worry.
But yeah, I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be asked. So I'm a small part of this amazing community that we're all a part of, and I really appreciate you giving me the time to say hello to everybody, and God bless, and get out there and fish.
Cool. All right. Well, with that being said, I mean, nothing else to do but get out of here.
All right.